Good evening. She's been in power for less than a month, and already the British Prime Minister Liz Truss has been forced to make a humiliating U-turn. The British government is now going to reverse a cut to the highest rate of income tax, which had sparked a furious reaction, as well as some turmoil on the financial markets last week. The British Chancellor, Kwasi Kwarteng, said that the decision had been taken with humility. This as he addressed the British Conservative Party's conference a little earlier on today. Well, here with me in the studios, our International Affairs Editor, Armin Georgian. Armin, did the Chancellor provide the necessary reassurance, do you think, in his address to sort of calm things down?
Well, judging by the markets, Tom, this speech didn't really move the needle much one way or the other. But just to remind our viewers, the backdrop to all this is just a really extraordinary series of events with this massive intervention when it was last week by the Bank of England to stop pension funds being wiped out. So essentially, the Conservative Party's reputation for economic management has taken a massive credibility hit, absolutely huge. And all of this was sort of put to one side, I thought, quite sort of nonchalantly in a way by the Chancellor. He kind of euphemistically talked about turbulence, which is, a very, very mild way of putting what's been happening over the last week or so. Let's take a listen now to the UK Chancellor speaking at that Conservative Party conference in Birmingham.
But I can be frank. I know the plan put forward only 10 days ago has caused a little turbulence. I get it. We are listening and have listened. And now I want to focus on delivering the major parts of our growth package. Because with energy bills skyrocketing, a painful COVID aftermath, war on our continent, a 70-year high tax burden, slowing global growth rates, and glacially slow infrastructure delivery, we couldn't simply do nothing. We can't sit idly by.
So essentially, Tom, there, he swept under the carpet these extraordinary events of the last week, also put to one side this very big U-turn, which, far from being a distraction, was actually at the very heart of how that particular wing of the party thinks ideologically about tax cuts. And the rest of his speech was really pressing some pretty familiar buttons, I thought, about what it means to be a conservative. What do we stand for as conservative? It's, pretty cookie-cutter stuff, I thought, most of it. And perhaps that's why he got polite applause, but not really anything that I could discern as being particularly kind of rousing or warm in its response.
Okay, well, stay with us, Armin, because I just want to bring in our guest, John McTernan, who's a political strategist and commentator and a former advisor to Tony Blair. Thank you very much indeed for joining us from the UK. I mean, just looking at listening to what's been said there by the Chancellor and by the Prime Minister in the last 24 hours or so, in your views, I mean, clearly they're both in damage control mode, but is it too late? I mean, has the damage already been done, do you think?
It's far, far too late. This is farcical. The Conservative Party have recorded over the last 5 days their biggest, their lowest votes against the Labour Party in opinion polls. So the biggest lead for the Labour Party in public opinion. It feels as though the country has shifted. The country's decided that this lot are a shower, and it doesn't matter what they do, how they change things, because, to be honest, this 45p tax rate, the higher rate of tax, was a tiny part of the tax cuts, a tiny part of the tax giveaway, a tiny part of the financial irresponsibility which led to the markets marking down the government. And we still have interest rates which are rising, which will mean mortgage rates rising, because Britain's a country of variable mortgage rates, and people, when fixed rates come off, 3,000 people a day come off a fixed rate mortgage. So we're going to be heading for doubled or trebled mortgage repayments. The Tory party heading into the storm, and they don't sound at all coherent to me, or I suspect the markets, or more importantly, the voters.
Stay with us. I think our international affairs commentator wanted to join in the conversation. You had something to say on this issue.
Yeah, just to really underscore something that John McTernan said there about mortgages. I think that's a really important part of this whole story. I mean, interest rates are rising, so people that are going to have to refinance their mortgages are suddenly going to find that they're paying a lot more every month, possibly hundreds of pounds more in some people's cases. So the sort of tax, what are they called? The sort of tax breaks that people have got are essentially wiped out by those that are going to have to pay more in mortgages every month. So essentially, people are being made poorer, and they're being squeezed more as a result of having to refinance their mortgages. And of course, all of this amid an energy squeeze. Another important part of this whole puzzle is what the UK energy regulator said today about likely gas shortages. So you're looking at more fuel poverty as well this winter. And I think once we hear from Liz Truss on Wednesday, it's probably not going to be enough for her just to do this kind of, a reading from the memo. We're just here to deliver, we've got to get on with it. This sort of thing that she keeps repeating. I just don't think that's going to cut it with, as John was saying, this 30% difference between the Conservatives and Labour now in the opinion polls. How is she actually going to tackle all these things that are going to have such a big impact on people's lives?
Absolutely. I mean, you raised some great points there. And I just want to ask John, I mean, how unprecedented is a U-turn of any type this early on in a Prime Minister's premiership, let alone something as important as this?
Well, we've never seen such a rapid U-turn, but nor have we ever seen such a commitment in advance to unpopularity. Because Liz Truss, when she was campaigning to be Prime Minister and afterwards, said she'd be willing to make the unpopular decisions. And as soon as one of the decisions becomes so unpopular, it can't be supported in her own party, she reverses on it. So I think it is an extraordinary situation, which is Boris Johnson replaced by Liz Truss. And how often can you keep doing this? This must be the question for the Tory party. They must be very worried about how this week is going to pan out, how Wednesday's leader speech is going to go, because, as I said before, the biggest tax cuts are yet to come. They're going to go through for business. The biggest hit on household income is coming, which is mortgage repayments increasing. So the pressure is going to come on later in the winter. And if that turns into a full-blown housing crisis, or as your correspondent said, if it turns into a gas supply crisis, I think this government look like toast, but the polls suggest that they are toast already, that the voters have decided. It may be a long time to the next election in the UK, but I think the verdict is in already.
Yeah, I mean, just looking at it from this side of the channel, obviously here in Paris, I mean, the reputation the UK has had, in recent decades has been a nation of stability, really, of financial and political stability. But 4 prime ministers in 6 years. I mean, what do you think's happening to the British reputation across the world now?
Look, I think you're absolutely right. A country that was seen to be stable, first past the post, our electoral system delivers strong governments by and large, which is meant to give you stability. But the ruling party have inside them an instability, which I think has been caused by Brexit. That the idea that the solution to challenging external circumstances is leaving the European Union has been shown to be false. But the Brexiteers who now run the Tory government are chasing an idea, an ideal that they can never meet, they can never match. But this kind of populist drug of, if we try this, it could be better. If we try this, it could be better. If we try this, it could be better. And so in that sense, you've got an instability inside the Conservative Party. And the only thing that restores stability is if they are allowed to quietly go to opposition, spend some time thinking about themselves. The British system works that way. When a governing party runs out of energy or ideas, it's always put into opposition by the voters. The shame is it's 2.5 years maybe until the next election in the UK.
Well, not necessarily, because we did hear today from someone rather unlikely, perhaps someone you don't agree with very often, John, the former culture minister, Nadine Dorries, who actually backed Liz Truss as Prime Minister just a month or so ago, now says she must call an election because she's got no personal mandate. I mean, how likely do you think it is that former allies are going to turn on her, and we might very well find ourselves in a situation where the British people do go to the polls sooner than we might think?
Oh, look, I think that was very interesting that Nadine Dorries, a strong supporter of Liz Truss, has turned on her, called for an election now. But the thing is that one member of Parliament can't cause an election to happen. A majority of the House of Commons is required to dissolve the House of Commons. And at the moment, the Tory party have a majority of 77, over 70 seats. And so they may well face a series of the votes that knock down their proposals or reversals, but there's no quick way to a general election. The faster route is, amazingly, to choosing another prime minister, to have 5 prime ministers in 6 years, because that's the way the British system works. Because nobody can dissolve the House of Parliament apart from a prime minister asking for an election, or the House of Commons itself voting for a dissolution. And I think that as Conservative MPs look at the polls and see they may well lose their seats in hundreds and not just in 10s or 20s, they may well be reluctant to vote, to be the turkeys voting for early Christmas. But this is going to be turbulent times the next few months.
OK, well, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. John McTernan, thank you very much indeed to you. And thank you to our international affairs editor, Armand Georgian. Thanks for your analysis.